it starts off with this incredible question that is a question that's still asked today, just in different words, but it's the same question. The second verse, how long have I called for help, O Lord, and you don't listen? Like, why is this happening? There's this terrible thing happening.
Yeah.
And I've been crying out and I've been asking for help and I don't seem to get any help. It is the classic question that a person of faith, when going through either something personal or through something global, asks.
Welcome to Cross Connections, Season 2, Cover to Cover, as we read along with you each week and discuss the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley,
Elliot Van Hoy,
and Natalie Hill. Join us as we discover how these stories connect us to God, to our inner selves, and to one another in a world that tries so hard to disconnect us. Welcome, one and all, back to Studio 1715 and this week's episode of the Cross Connections podcast. We are in episode 50.
Wow.
Big cheer
Wow.
sound, if I can find one, if I have time to add that.
50.
Episode 50, and this is our final episode in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures. I'm so excited.
This has been like the longest group project ever.
Really. Can I ask the dumbest question? How are we in episode 50 if we do one episode a week?
That's a great question, Elliot. I'd love to tell you. Because we did at least 4 preseason kind of teaser episodes, and we've already done all 4 Gospels.
Yeah.
That's
So
a great answer.
combined, I think that gets us all the way up to episode 50.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there was something else we tossed in there as a bonus.
There's probably, maybe been a few like
Early
extras.
Early on.
we said we thought 20-minute episodes would be enough. And then we're like, if we have anything more, we can put it in a bonus. That was like really early on.
Really
Yeah.
early on, yeah.
And we have blown through that.
We're at like hour and a half episodes.
Yeah.
But we've discovered that the core group of our listeners seems to be okay with that. I mean,
Both of them love it. Yep. Yep. They both love it.
That took me a
all
second.
5 of you.
And one of them is my mom.
Right,
So
Maureen.
Your mom, Allie. Oh, no, we
No,
have a
I
great
know.
group of podcast listeners. This past weekend in our real time, which is obviously different than listener
as
time.
record. Yeah.
Yeah, so as we record, this past weekend was our St. David's Fair, our annual huge event. And we had several folks come up to us and tell us how much they enjoyed the podcast.
Over and over. Yeah.
It was really lovely to get to see people and to hear.
To meet some of our fellow cross connectors.
Yeah. So that was a joy. But yes, we're on episode 50. And we're going to be moving into the New Testament next week. But before we get there, we got to finish out all the effects of the Babylonian exile, the way into it and the way out of it.
Yeah. We're going to kind of go back through the whole history of everything we've just done through these 5 prophets.
Yeah. Remember, these are minor prophets, but they have something major to say.
Yes. Good things, big things come in small packages.
Yeah, they can. I always like to think that. I'm a short person, so.
Never thought of you as short, but okay.
I just have that in my head from when I was shorter. I'm not Sabrina Carpenter short, but
Okay.
I sure am not Taylor Swift tall. All right, so we have this week Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi.
That's right.
And I think I pronounced all of
think you did.
those
Yeah, pretty
the
good.
way that people would pronounce them.
I've heard a million different ways of pronouncing Habakkuk.
Yeah.
Habakkuk.
Habakkuk is a big one.
Habakkuk. Yeah, but it doesn't matter, however you say it.
Gets the point across.
Yeah, it really depends where you put the stress, like in what syllable. People really can stress it in different ways.
Yep.
Yeah, which emphasis on which syllable.
Syllable.
So Habakkuk and Zephaniah are in the before Babylonian exile era. And then the other 3, Haggai.
Wait, what did you just say?
Did I say that wrong?
I think so.
I think I did.
Yeah.
Or
I think
the
you said
Babylonian.
Yeah, no.
Zechariah.
Zephaniah.
See, okay, so this is going to happen
Yeah,
because
this-
I might have
Zechariah and Zephaniah, I'm going to trip over these two.
And I might
Yeah.
have even just misheard because now I'm like, wait, did you say Zechariah or did you say Zephaniah?
Should we
well,
go back?
and Zechariah is
You
the
need to
note
go
in
back
front
the
of
tape,
me, and I
check
don't
the
think-
tape.
and I don't think I mean Zechariah.
So your
hold on.
initial point.
My initial point was Habakkuk and Zephaniah are pre-exilic,
Yes.
and then our other three, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, are post-exilic.
Yes.
They kind of take place in and around the era of Ezra, Nehemiah.
Yep. Which that's a throwback. I'm sure many of our listeners intimately remember the stories in Ezra and Nehemiah.
Yeah, I
would
think
hope
those
so.
were short books.
Think about that. So we're reading these three prophets who are set in that period of the rebuilding of the temple. And we read that before all of the prophets, we read that before all of the wisdom literature, Proverbs, Psalms,
It is a
Job.
throwback.
We read it before Esther. I mean, that was ages ago.
It was a long time back.
Yeah.
I remember
We were
at the
younger.
time.
We were younger people.
Yeah, Rick
back
had
then.
way less gray hair.
I was just going to say that I had way less gray hair. It was a long time back. And I remember one of the big things about Ezra and Nehemiah being the contrast with Ruth, because Ezra and Nehemiah are very anti other peoples, other
foreigners.
groups,
Right,
foreigners,
right.
whereas Ruth was this raising up
yeah.
of a foreigner. So
Yep.
we'll see a little bit of what's going on in there. What's interesting is that the prophets that we're reading from here are named all the way back in Ezra. If you wanted to go back and look for them, they're in there. But we're going to start off with our pre-exilic minor prophets here, our Habakkuk and our Zephaniah.
So I feel of all the five, I feel like I have the most to say about Habakkuk, however you want to do it.
Habby.
So he's again prior to the Babylonian invasion.
We think.
But the Babylonian invasion
Uh-oh.
is at least on the horizon. They know it's coming. Like something bad's about to happen. And so this book is in the impending shadow of what's happening. And it starts off with this incredible question that is a question that's still asked today, just in different words, but it's the same question. The second verse, how long have I called for help, O Lord, and you don't listen? Like, why is this happening? There's this terrible thing happening.
Yeah.
And I've been crying out and I've been asking for help and I don't seem to get any help. It is the classic question that a person of faith, when going through either something personal or through something global, asks.
Yeah. Backtracking a little bit, that is a phenomenal question. To say a little bit about the person asking this question, Habakkuk, this prophet of God. We think this was leading up to the Babylonian exile, but unlike many of our prophetic books, the book of Habakkuk does not start with any sort of detailing of what reign of a king
Right.
that this took place under. You'll see in our next prophets coming up, that is usually the case. We've seen that in many of the prophetic books we've been in. Also, the Hebrew name Habakkuk, not used anywhere else in the
Right.
Hebrew Bible. This is the only time that name comes up. Unlike some of the prophets we're going to talk about today, like Haggai and Zechariah, these names are referenced in Ezra 5. Habakkuk is never referenced anywhere else. So it's just really interesting. In terms of the form of the book, it also is quite unique. So we talked about how Jonah was unique in that this book, Jonah, is a book in which it's not actually really the utterances of the prophet that are being told. It is a story.
Right.
Habakkuk is really interesting because it also is not really the utterances of the prophet being told to the people. It's more so set up literarily as these alternating dialogues between the prophet and God.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, a lot of it features this prophet as a complainer.
Yeah.
And I'm not using that word flippantly. In chapter 2, verse 1, we see, what will God answer concerning my complaint? That's what Habakkuk says in chapter 2, verse 1. And so in some ways, Habakkuk is really close to Job. It's this, as you just pointed out, Rick, to bring us full circle, it's this questioning of God. How long will I cry out? When will you listen?
Right.
What are you going to do, God?
Specifically, he sees his enemies, which would be Babylon.
Yep.
And Babylon's referenced a couple times here as getting ahead of the people of God. And
Right.
that seems to overthrow the cosmic order of how things should be. And this, again, it goes back to, this could be modern day. Like, why are good things happening to bad people, and why are bad things happening to good people?
Right.
Yeah, there's a line early on in here, chapter 1, verse 13. Your eyes are too pure to behold evil, and you cannot look on wrongdoing. Why do you look on the treacherous and are silent when the wicked swallow those more righteous than they?
Yeah, I would say what puts Habakkuk kind of in the same realm of literature as Job is that at the heart of Habakkuk is the category of paradox, right? So we've talked a lot about the Deuteronomistic historian, and we've seen that theology and that viewpoint of God using the forces of history to accomplish God's will.
Yep.
Habakkuk is really in a lot of ways straining against this as the kind of predominant view, right? Like that God, to the verse Natalie just read, like, how could this even make sense that you would use the Babylonians? There was a previous episode where there was some prophet where I was like, this prophet is so illogical, because the prophet was talking about how the Babylonians are going to judge Judah. And then the prophet, I can't remember which one, but then the prophet is, okay, God, you need to judge Babylon. And remember, I was like, this makes no sense. You just said God is using Babylon. And I feel like Habakkuk is the one that really gets me on this.
Yeah.
Because Habakkuk, that is what Habakkuk is saying, is like, how does this even make sense that you are doing this? And in some sense, he resists it. He's, from what I know about you, God, this doesn't make sense.
Yep.
And they're really, not to jump to the end of the book, but
But you're going to do it anyways.
But I'm going to. There's no resolution given. I'm not setting this up to be like, here's the neat, tidy answer. The book ends with the word yet. Yet will I trust you. Yet will I rejoice in you. Yet will I exalt the God of my salvation. And it's just like Job.
Just like Job.
Exactly. There's no answer. Right. And that is kind of bound up in human creatureliness, finitude, the fact that these things are in some ways, like I said, paradoxical, incomprehensible.
Yep. Since you went to the end of the book, can we talk about the end of the book for a second?
Let's talk about
What
it.
the very last thing noted?
Not the very last thing, but the entire third chapter, which is a wild piece of poetry.
Yeah.
It's this incredible vision.
God
and
is a warrior.
Scholars are divided on this, and the language, the visuals, it reads like a much, much older text. It reads like some of the oldest texts in the Bible, like Judges 5. And it depicts God, and we've talked about this before, as a storm god who is coming on a chariot of clouds. He's got a spear in one hand. He's got bow and arrow in the other. It is exactly how the Babylonian god Marduk is pictured in the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation epic. And here's where scholars are divided. It could be that whoever was putting the book of Habakkuk together took this much older piece of poetry and then married it into the book. Or they ended up writing in the style of what Old Hebrew and what old texts would have sounded and looked like.
Right.
Which is, both options are absolutely fascinating to me, particularly when you have him talking about the Babylonians and how they seem to be getting ahead. And then he seems to take their text and insert God as if God is the storm, Yahweh is the storm god. Anyway.
I was going to compare it to us using God Save the King or Queen as the foundational piece of music for My Country 'Tis of Thee. Only it leans more on the actual text of the original song. It would be like that.
Again, the parallel with Job, the vision that Job receives is God as this cosmic agent, the God that wrestles the sea monsters.
Leviathan.
Yeah. So again, very interesting parallel there. I'm actually kind of just realizing that.
In undergrad, I was taught this chapter by Mark Smith, who's one of 10 people in the world who read Ugaritic. And what's the one kind of writing that's, cuneiform. He reads cuneiform.
Not the same Mark Smith at Princeton Theological Seminary.
Was he a...
Mark Smith.
What was he teach?
Testament.
That's him.
Yeah.
Wait, so you both had the same...
He was at St. Joe's for a short period of time.
Yeah. He's like one of the predominant...
Yeah. He translated a bunch of cuneiform
Yeah.
tablets. He's incredible.
Yep.
But he taught this third chapter as if it was written much older and was one of the oldest texts of the Bible.
Wow.
Interesting.
That's very interesting. The thing I wanted to talk about Habakkuk is Habakkuk 2:4,
Wow.
which is arguably one of the most important single verses in the Old Testament for the New Testament.
Yeah.
So Habakkuk 2:4 reads in my version, and I'll be interested, I know, Rick, because you have a version that sometimes will translate the Hebrew a little differently than the NRSV. The NRSV reads, "Look at the proud, their spirit is not right in them." And then here's the key part of the verse for the New Testament, specifically for Paul, "But the righteous live by their faith." And this is a perfect segue into the fact that we'll be entering into the New Testament soon here, specifically into the letters of Paul, because Paul quotes Habakkuk 2:4 explicitly in Romans 1:17, which is really the thesis statement of the book of Romans, and then also quotes it in Galatians 3:11. And the thing in particular I wanted to talk about it, which is really interesting, and this is going to be a real jump ahead, but seeing as we'll be talking about Romans in 2 episodes,
We got to get through Acts first.
we got to get through Acts, but what's really interesting is that in the Hebrew, my NRSV, I kind of find it a bit annoying the way it's translated, because when you read the sentence, "The righteous live by their faith," does it strike you kind of as implicitly a plural statement? The righteous will live by their faith. Doesn't it sound plural?
Yes.
In the Hebrew, it's singular.
Yeah.
It's the righteous person will live by their faith. So the righteous is singular, faith is singular. And what's really interesting is that when Paul writes in Greek in Romans 1:17 and Galatians 3:11,
Is he pluralizing?
no, it's also singular.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Which is really fascinating, because when people read Romans 1:17 and Galatians 3:11, they often make those verses about their faith, right? So, they take Romans 1:17, which, let me see if I can I think I had it pulled up here somewhere. So Romans 1:17, this is what Paul says. "For in it the righteousness of God is revealed through faith for faith, as it is written," so again explicitly citing Habakkuk, "the one who is righteous will live by faith." And so that actually does a little bit of a better job of saying the one. Other translations will make it much more clearly kind of nominative and say the righteous one will live by faith. And this might sound really nerdy and really beside the point. But the point here is that scholars of the New Testament, some scholars, but a significant group, have said in recent years, in the last 50, 60 years or so, that when Paul is quoting Habakkuk 2:4 in Romans 1:17 and Galatians 3:11, he's talking about Jesus, that Jesus is the righteous one who lived by faith. And if you're like, what does this have to do with anything?
That makes a huge difference.
Yes, it makes a huge difference, because part of what it is saying is that for Paul's understanding of faith, the primary importance of the word faith in Paul's theology is not the individual, quote unquote, believer's faith. That there's this kind of classic theology that says, what do you have to do to be saved? You have to have faith. And so it kind of puts the locus and the agency of faith on the individual person in the here and now. The most important thing is that you have faith.
Yeah, you must believe. You have to be a believer. You have to declare the believer.
And there's lots of verses you can kind of use to get to that, but these are pretty significant ones. And Romans 1:17, if you understand it this way, like I said, this is the thesis statement for the book.
Yep.
So it becomes really pivotal that we maybe understand what's going on here. And to wrap all of this up, the point is that a lot of scholars will say Paul is actually talking about Christ, which means the locus of faith for Paul is not the individual believer, it's Christ's faith. And that we participate in Christ's faith through faith, of course, right? It doesn't negate faith on our parts, but it actually says the most important thing that has been done is Christ's work on our behalf, and that we then join in and participate in that. And this might seem minor, but it's really it's a huge shift.
And there's that phrase, pistis Christou.
Yes,
so we are saved by faith in Christ. But it can also, it's Greek, and the Greek words can actually be translated perfectly fine in 2 different ways. It could be, we are saved by faith in Christ, or it could just as easily be rendered, we are saved by faith of Christ.
Yeah.
And so the whole conversation that scholars are having is, are we saved by our faith, or are we saved by the faithfulness of Jesus?
Yep.
And
yeah, that's a huge difference,
That
because it has
is
to
a
do
huge,
because
right.
then how you interact with the world shifts
Yeah.
Yep.
between, is it Jesus's faith, Christ's faith, or is it something that we have to do?
Yeah.
What I think is interesting here too is in my notes, they're talking about it being a plural group of people. And now you and I have different editions. I don't know if your edition is any different, but they're indicating in the notes in my NRSV that they're talking about the righteous meaning this group of people, and the proud being this other group of people, which again, that makes it plural, which is the way that it sounds to us. But what we're hearing is that it's not intended to be plural. It's intended to be singular.
This is why I brought up Paul, because I think Paul's actually being very novel here. You're exactly right. What they're talking about in the notes is that literally in this context, the distinction is between, as categories, the proud and the righteous, how the proud live and how the righteous live. My point was, in the nitty gritty, the word righteous in Hebrew is singular. And then when Paul uses, even though it is like designating a group, like just in the conjugation of the word, the parsing of the word, it is a singular. And my point is, Paul uses that, even though like in the context, it's very obviously talking about this group of people, the context of Habakkuk. This is going to get into a really interesting conversation when we get into the New Testament about the way New Testament authors use the Old Testament. And sometimes they will draw on something as nitty gritty as like whether a word is plural or singular.
Sure.
And my point is, Paul uses this. You could almost say he uses it like a proof text, but I think this is kind of like Jewish midrash. They do these things that we modern people would never think of. We read this and we're like, obviously the context is talking about the proud and the righteous. Right. Paul uses it and is like, this is Jesus
obviously
Christ.
It's talking about Jesus.
Yeah, this is obviously talking about Jesus Christ. And I just think that is like the niftiest, that's like the nerdiest way I could put it, the niftiest thing.
It's so nifty.
It's so nifty.
It's nifty, but isn't that just, I'm sorry, it's just so confusing.
Yeah.
If the original context was a singular, I mean, we do this with words all the time. We have lots of words that mean a group of people, but we treat that as a singular.
Yep.
Because the group is one group. It's a whole.
Right.
So we treat it like it's one.
But it's so funny. This like Jewish midrash just picks up on these things you would never think. Again, to use Paul, because Paul's really the kind of the quintessential example of this. I think it's 2 Corinthians that Paul talks about Moses and the staff. And Moses, you remember from Exodus, Moses strikes the rock, and it's actually this moment like,
and that rock is Christ.
Yeah, and Paul's like, the rock is Christ.
Is it the one that with the water comes out?
Yep.
And then he gets in trouble
actually,
for that later because he did not.
I think that was
claim that it
different
was
rock.
God.
Different rock.
That might have been a different
Are you
rock.
sure?
Yeah, there were a couple rocks.
Either way, the point is when you read Paul talking about this in 2 Corinthians, I think if you just have this like historical mindset of reading Exodus and then reading Paul, you're like, what are you talking about, Paul? Like, the rock is not Christ. What are you? But he has these really inventive ways of reading the Old Testament. This might be a good time to shift, though. I'll be shifting to Zechariah. But Zechariah, we don't have to go there. We'll go to confuse people, we'll go to Zephaniah first. But Zechariah famously is also used quite a bit in the New Testament. And Matthew uses Zechariah 9 to talk about Jesus riding into Jerusalem as a fulfillment of prophecy. And we'll get there. But the point is, he also uses it in a really bizarre way that isn't what is in Zechariah 9.
That you would never read that by yourself and be like, oh, this is talking about that.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, we'll get there. If anything, there's an argument to be made that he makes a mistake in reading Zechariah. We'll get there in a minute.
Yeah.
But I know you might have had one more thing you wanted to say about Habakkuk.
Just a couple of things.
Are we talking about Habakkuk?
We started in Habakkuk, but the thing is, we're Christians, so we keep ending up in the New Testament no matter what. So we're in Habakkuk, which I'm now pronouncing differently than I want. Thank you very much. It has a bunch of woes, which I thought was interesting. The alas for you, it's going to come back and bite you. That's my summary of what all the alases have to say. There was also a point in chapter 2 where there's grief or lament over the violence done not only to Lebanon, but also to the animals and to the bloodshed and the violence to the earth.
Yeah.
So again, this is our prophets decrying not only what's happening to the people, but also to all of creation. The care extends beyond humanity to all of creation on a regular basis. And in here, apparently, Lebanon had been stripped of all of its great cedar trees. That just makes my heart sad.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of trees. So just like J.R.R. Tolkien. So we were talking about Job And there's this whole, is this fair? There's all of these complaints made. And that what Habakkuk seems to be trying to say is, no, what's happening isn't fair, but it'll all come out in my time or God's time.
Right.
It'll all come to righteousness, though it's not for you to say when. I get to say when.
There was one other like really amazing nerdy thing that I noticed in this reading of
I have
Habakkuk.
one more nerdy thing too.
Okay.
You go.
All right.
Go ahead.
We got more nerdy
It'd
Habakkuk.
be awesome if ours was the same. It's probably not. So mine is about Habakkuk 1:12.
Nope.
Okay. So Habakkuk 1:12, really a very strange wording on Habakkuk's part. He says, "Are you not from of old, O Lord my God, my Holy One? You shall not die. O Lord, you have marked them for judgment." So first of all, when you read it, even as a modern reader, it's such a strange thing for Habakkuk to say to God, "You shall not die." And if you think it's strange hearing that and listening to it or having read it, you are not alone.
Yeah.
Because the Masoretic text, which we've talked about a couple times, it's the authoritative Jewish Hebrew Bible. It was finalized in about 1000 AD CE. And they changed the wording of this because as they were putting
did not know this.
As they were putting together the Hebrew Bible, they were back in the day there was no computers. There were scribes. They copied, right? And so they would make copies of the books and they would put it together. And when they were copying Habakkuk, they read this and they were like, "That's a really strange thing Habakkuk said. He must have misspoken." So they changed "you shall not die" to, in Hebrew, "we shall not die," because for them theologically it was like
you can't put God and death in the same thought.
Exactly. And what an interesting change in light of kind of what Christians proclaim about Jesus, that Jesus is in God's very self, God dying on a cross. So just a very interesting little bit of scribal history for some of our listeners.
Yeah, that there was a note about that in mine about how there was a different version of it.
So do modern Jewish Bibles follow the Masoretic text there and say "we"?
I believe so.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I believe most modern Jewish Bibles are based on the Masoretic text.
Okay.
Time to make a phone call to Rabbi Green.
Yeah.
Phone a friend.
I could look that up.
So here's my nerdy thing. I just want to go back to chapter 3.
It would be really funny if we phoned him, right?
Be like, "Open your Bible, Rabbi Green."
Hey, Rabbi Green, do you have a second? I just need to know how Habakkuk 1:12 is translated. And then you can go.
He'd be like, "What?"
I'll call you about it later.
Back to chapter 3, back to this depiction of Yahweh as a storm god riding on the clouds with a bow and clubs. This is verses 8 and following. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian text that has Marduk coming on with the chariot, he's going to fight Tiamat, who is a primordial god in the Babylonian pantheon who represents chaos and water. It actually reads very similar to Genesis 1.
Is this the one who dies and is reborn?
No, this is the one who Marduk kills, and he tears her carcass in half.
Makes humanity out of it.
And creates the universe out of it.
Oh.
He then kills another god named Kingu and then makes humanity out of its blood.
Okay.
Lots of killing going on.
Yeah.
But in chapter 3, there are all of these references to the river, the sea, rivers, water, the deep, the sea, over and over again.
Yeah.
It is obviously, again, it's either an ancient text that depicts God as a god like Marduk, or it is a much later author who is writing in like Shakespearean Hebrew and pretending like it's a much older text where God is like a storm god fighting the waters.
Yep.
Okay. That's my last nerdiness.
All right.
For Habakkuk.
I wonder why they would choose to do that. Do you think that's about trying to relate to those who are already of the Babylonian faith theology and try to convert them over or something? Or is it just an easy way to try to take somebody else's impression of their God and apply it to your own?
It was common. So it wasn't just Marduk. Baal was also a storm god. El was a Canaanite storm god. They all rode on. It was the way you talked about the chief god of your God's pantheon was you talked about him in this way. Now, I think there are some things in this one, in Habakkuk, that specifically reference Marduk and the Enuma Elish. And I think it's probably to say that it goes back to the whole reason of the book. Why are we allowing the Babylonians to thrive? Why do they get to win? And I think by making the storm god Yahweh, Habakkuk, the author of Habakkuk, is saying that Yahweh is better than Marduk.
Right.
That because our God is better than their God, we should be the ones that are coming out on top.
I think this is a very deep theological point, but it's one Rick himself made in the forum series over the last 4 weeks. Rick helped present to members of St. David's a real tricky subject, theories of the atonement, and went through different theories of the atonement. And one of the things we talked about, and Rick encouraged us to really reflect on, is that our metaphors for God are always historically conditioned. And so I think this is a really great example of that. And it's a great reminder that like throughout the Old Testament, we have various metaphors of God. We talked about it in Hosea, right? God as a husband and this covenantal relationship. Yeah. We've seen it elsewhere. God as a father, right? God as a warrior is one of those metaphors. And it's in some of these other minor prophets as well.
Yeah.
So Zephaniah 3:17, the Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen it other places in the Old Testament. We saw it in Exodus with the escape from Egypt, right? God as this kind of warrior that challenges Pharaoh, that splits the Red Sea.
Yep.
And I'd have to go back. I'm curious if it's in the Song of Miriam after, right, that event. Isn't it Miriam who sings?
Song's really short, but the Song of Moses is much longer.
Right.
But there is a bunch of water motif,
Totally.
obviously,
Yeah.
because
Tons of water.
and water being split,
Right.
so that people can walk through. So
again, just a good reminder that there are these various metaphors.
And obviously, that is not a metaphor that is going to speak to us because they're not used to thinking about storm gods unless we're really into the Avengers and Thor there. But it's just not something that jumps off the page to us like the shepherd metaphor or the spouse metaphor. But this is one of the ways that ancient people would have related to God. And it's absolutely one of the ways that ancient Israelites, Judahites would have related to Yahweh.
All right. So since we've already mentioned Zephaniah, maybe it's time to move on in to Zephaniah. Zephaniah is also taking place around the same time as Nahum and Habakkuk, towards the end of Judea, pre-Babylonian exile.
So the book begins by saying the word of the Lord came to Zephaniah, and this was in the days of King Josiah. So we've talked a lot about King Josiah over the course of the podcast. A great reformer. Remember, one of the things Josiah is remembered for is removing the high places, the altars to Baal. And so you'll see in the words of Zephaniah is pretty concerned with this, right? So even in the very beginning, Zephaniah 1:4, I will cut off from this place every remnant of Baal, is one of the things God says. So this is really one of the main concerns of the heart of this book.
Probably written at the beginning of the reform, so
Or right before it happened.
Before it happened, so like there's work to be done. This is not after Josiah has done all of his work. And his point in the early, like many of the prophets we've been reading, there's a section of doom and prophecies against spiritual corruption. Here it's specifically against idolatry, but also some injustice. But then the book takes a hopeful turn, and quite frankly, Christians would obviously read the end of chapter 3 as being quite messianic and looking forward to Jesus.
The lame will walk.
Yep.
The outcasts will be welcomed in.
So going back to chapter 1, there's some references to the day of the Lord in there.
Yes.
We talked last week about the day of the Lord. And in Zephaniah, it's not a good day.
Yeah, he's definitely similar to Amos in that sense. Like Rick said, the end of Zephaniah is much more hopeful than Amos, though we get a little bit of hope at the end of Amos. Remember, we talked about a lot of scholars think that was tacked on later. But you're right, Zephaniah is definitely closest to Amos than some of the other prophets.
It also had a similarity in the way that it was constructed. As we were talking about Amos, we talked about how in many of the other prophets, there's all this stuff against Judah or what's happening there, and then it changes to now we're going to be upset with the other nations. But in Amos, they talked about the other nations first, and then it like flipped it on its head and then said, now we're going to talk about you. And I noticed that Zephaniah had the same kind of construction as Amos in that way.
Yep, it's like a mini Amos.
It was
it's
a
like
little mini
it's a
Amos.
mini Amos.
Not as grand as Amos in some ways, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about Zephaniah, so maybe the only other thing I will say is that interesting historical point, Zephaniah 1:15, when he's talking about the day of the Lord, right? He's describing it in a way that is not great. It's a day of wrath, a day of distress, a day of anguish. And then in the middle of verse 15, you see a day of ruin. And that word ruin in Hebrew is originally Shoah. And you may recognize that word because this is the word that's used even to this day in continental Europe as the main word for the Holocaust.
Right.
Oh.
Which Holocaust is originally a Greek word meaning burnt offering. A Shoah is a Hebrew word. Meaning, yeah. Which is it's kind of designating the cosmic horrible scope of that event. And then Shoah is a Hebrew word meaning ruin. And
So the reason that's done is because Holocaust is a Greek word, but it also, the whole burnt offering had purpose. So we remember back in Leviticus, it's about cleansing of sin and reuniting God. And there were Jewish people in the last century who said, we cannot talk about the Holocaust of the Jewish people as having purpose. Like this horrible thing happened for a reason.
Right.
And so they use now Shoah is the term of most frequently used, especially in Europe, but it's coming in America as well. Shoah.
Really? This is the first I've heard of
as
that.
total ruin, destruction, but without purpose. Like the thing is just destroyed, but not for a thing.
Yep.
That really does shift the
Yeah.
thinking. I don't know that too many Americans know where the word Holocaust comes from and what its original meaning is.
Right.
I certainly, this is new to me, and I've visited the Holocaust Museum.
Totally.
And I seem to have missed that.
Yeah. So I was actually just rereading about this today on the Holocaust Museum website. And the article I was reading didn't give, I would actually be interested, and maybe one of the listeners can write in that may know, I don't know the historical origin of when the word
Yeah, I don't
Holocaust
either.
began to be used. That I don't know. Like at what point was it 1946 and it was used by this person and this is the way that it kind of took off. I don't know that history.
Yeah.
But it is the predominant term in a lot of the English speaking, especially American world.
Yeah,
But
it just never occurred to me. Like, again, it's something that happened before I was born, so it's just always been.
It's just that's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have to look into that.
So that's really,
Yeah.
only other interesting point about Zephaniah I have.
All right.
Yep. So it ends up with a little bit of a hopeful ending there. All right. So now we're going to shift into post-exile. We've been to Babylon,
70 years later.
seen all that, and now it is time to return. And our first two prophets here, Haggai and Zechariah, are both named as prophets in Ezra who were calling for the rebuilding of the temple.
Right.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happens in these books. Haggai excoriates the people for living in their own homes and having taken care of them, but they haven't worked on God's home, which is exactly the same way the temple comes about in earlier books when it's David who realizes that he's living in a house and a palace, but the Ark of the Covenant is living in a tent, and he's like, I got to do something about that. And that's exactly what Haggai is doing. Interesting. Just Haggai is one of the few prophets who was respected by the people that he was prophesying to. He doesn't get thrown down. He doesn't get exiled. Do what he says. It's like him and Jonah are like the two prophets that actually end up having success.
But he talked about Jonah might not have actually existed. And was kind of,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Jonah's mythology, Haggai's, that's the real person we bothered to listen to. He was very focused on rebuilding the temple and doing it properly.
Yeah.
It's very heavy on temple theology and the return to how to honor God in this way in the temple.
Chapter 2, verse 9 says, the splendor of the later house will be greater than the earlier one, which honestly we know was not the case. That the rebuilt temple was at least at first, was a very humble rebuilding. It would be added onto multiple times. Then Herod, the same Herod who probably is the Herod that we think had all the children of Bethlehem killed, that he is the one who takes on this huge temple project and turns it into one of the great temples of the ancient world.
Yeah. There was some similarities, I felt like, with Ezekiel in that the wanting this next thing to be greater and the focus on the temple, and which makes some sense considering who Ezekiel was. He was the priest who became prophetic and did not get to be part of the return later. So Haggai almost feels somebody out of Ezekiel's mindset showed up back there and was like, all right,
Yep.
we got to do this. We got to get it right. And there's a strong implication that the struggles that they're having as they return, granted, the Jerusalem had been destroyed. The area was ransacked, not only by the Babylonians, but then also like the Edomites, and all helped make that a terrible ruin of things. People were torn away from one another, famine. Now they come back. You can't expect things to be going right away when they return, but Haggai makes it clear that the struggle that they're having is because they haven't rebuilt the temple.
Yeah.
And God is not there to support them in all of their doings, and that their doings are only half as good as they would be. If only they rebuilt the temple, then everything would be as fruitful as they would expect it to be. All right, so then we get to Zechariah, who's also named, as we said, in Ezra.
Yep.
And very similar. We're trying to rebuild the city and rebuild the temple. This book can be divided roughly in half versus chapters 1 through 8 and versus chapters 9 through 14. The first section is a series of like symbolic dreams about purification, rebuilding, divine protection. And 9 through 14 are oracles that are looking towards a humble, victorious king who will shepherd the final triumph of God, which obviously Christians read and be like, we know exactly who we're talking about here.
Right.
A humble and victorious king whose name is probably Jesus.
Right.
I thought it was interesting that in Zechariah 3:10, there's mention of, where does it say? On that day, says the Lord of hosts, you shall invite each other to come under your vine and fig tree.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, we were just talking about that reading Micah. It's almost as if Zechariah pulled from Micah.
Yep.
And the vine and fig tree imagery.
Yeah, they love the imagery of fig trees. Jesus curses the fig tree.
I have a note in my Bible from the translator who says that Haggai and Zechariah kind of go together because they're talking about the same thing, rebuilding of the temple. But Haggai's the bad cop and Zechariah's the good cop. Yeah. So Haggai's the one who's like hammering them. You should be doing this. And Zechariah's, look at the wonderful things that will happen if you do this. Right. So it's a much more positive, hey, let's do this instead of you better do this or else.
Yeah, Zechariah is really interesting too. Haggai, no offense to Haggai, fairly boring book. That's really just him like saying things.
Yep.
Zechariah is really interesting because it is closest to Ezekiel and Daniel in that it is kind of borderline apocalyptic literature.
Oh,
so
yeah.
with these visions,
and
visions
these
are
angels
taking
of
place.
the Lord.
Yeah, and what you'll notice is each vision he receives it has no idea what it means, and then an angel has to explain it to him. So you constantly see the angel said to Zechariah, the angel said to Zechariah. So I just thought that was an interesting note. Also, with that being said, as kind of this proto-apocalyptic literature, one of the things that's interesting in Zechariah is pretty much across the board, every time Zechariah talks about the Lord, not every time, but a lot of them, he calls the Lord of hosts. Yeah. This idea, this ancient idea that God presided over this divine council of kind of semi-divine angelic beings.
So interesting. That word hosts is the simple word for army.
Mm-hmm.
So like on the back of Israeli tanks is that same word, army, hosts. So my translation always 100% of the time translates that as Yahweh of armies.
Which I think is...
Get to your warrior God again.
Yeah.
Right. There is definitely that linguistic level. I like the host one only because it is the army component, but there is this character again from Job. Man, Job's coming up a lot. The accuser, who, if you remember in our Job episode, we talk about as
the heavenly court scene.
Yeah, as being in this kind of heavenly host, this army, this divine council. You may be reading and be like, what the heck's going on here? Because in 3:1, all of a sudden, there's this person, Joshua, who shows up in both Haggai and Zechariah. He's the first priest of the rededicated temple. And Joshua's standing before the angel of the Lord. And lo and behold, Satan, or really the Hebrew word is the accuser, stands at the right hand of God to accuse Joshua. And the accuser is rebuked by God. And just important again to name, this is a fascinating historical point, that when Zechariah was written and when Job was written, this figure was in some sense an opponent of God, but one of in God's counsel, in God's army.
Yeah.
It wasn't this kind of mythologized figure that had fallen from heaven and presided over hell and
Carries a pitchfork.
Right.
This is not that character.
Right.
That character will develop out of that. But he's a member of the court who is really meant to take the other side,
Right.
push.
and test people
Test.
almost. Yeah.
We hear referenced every single year of the Christian year. We hear Zechariah referenced on one particular Sunday every year. Yeah, I'll read it. This is chapter 9.
I'm going to guess which one it
Verse
is.
9, there your king will come to you. He'll be faithful and one who finds deliverance, humble and riding on a donkey.
Yes, that's
So,
right. The
Christ
riding
the
on a
King.
donkey.
I mean, you could read it on Christ the King, but no, it's
Lent.
Palm Sunday.
Palm
Yeah,
Sunday.
Palm
Palm
Sunday.
Sunday, when Jesus comes riding into Jerusalem,
Yep.
humble and riding on a donkey. And the gospel authors reference this verse from Zechariah when Jesus tells them to go find a donkey, and then the gospel author will quote this from Zechariah 9.
Which Gospels?
Oh, I don't know.
Man,
Off the top of your head.
Come on.
I wanted to talk
on.
about the good shepherd and the bad shepherds in Zechariah 10, but all right.
Which gospels?
So the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of John.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Isn't
is
that
interesting.
interesting?
That is not what.
And
How much do Matthew and John normally have in common?
that's a good question.
Yeah, right.
Not a whole ton. I
Maybe we
did
can
want to
get to
talk
that in
explicitly
season
about
3.
the Matthew 21 reference, because
Great.
again, this is an explicit, as you said, Rick, Matthew explicitly cites
Yep.
Zechariah. And so when you read Matthew 21, Matthew, I'll be gentle here. I won't be gentle. I'll just say it outright. Matthew seems to have misread
Yes.
Zechariah.
Yes.
Oh.
And so when you read Matthew 21, Matthew has in the mouth of Jesus, so this is Jesus speaking in verse 2 of chapter 21 of the Gospel of Matthew, saying to the disciples, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her.
Yes.
Untie them and bring them to me."
Yes.
And then when he quotes Zechariah, this is how he quotes Zechariah. And you'll notice a very important difference. "See, your king comes to you gentle and riding on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey."
It's going to
And-
switch from one to the other.
Yeah.
So there's two. Yeah, there's two. So in Zechariah, there is a Hebrew parallelism where Zechariah is saying a donkey, a colt.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Right.
It's one and the same animal.
Right.
It's a young
But-
donkey, not
yes.
a donkey
But
and it's cold.
But Matthew interprets it as two.
Matthew interprets it as two, which I've always thought is so funny because imagine
Yeah.
Jesus riding in on two
two-
animals.
yeah.
Like,
Especially because you're like a full-sized animal and like the baby one is very lopsided.
It's like his feet on the small one.
So it's just very interesting. I haven't
Yeah.
read a ton on this. I wonder that I think part of the question is, did Matthew have a copy of Zechariah where the scribe had made an error,
Yeah,
which is probably
that's-
most likely?
Punctuation wasn't
yeah.
what it was.
Yeah, punctuation matters. So it just makes for a fascinating moment in biblical history where Matthew kind of seems to trip up a little bit in his desire to have Jesus fulfill prophecy in a certain way.
Yep.
Also, another way that Matthew uses Zechariah to fulfill prophecy is there is a moment in Zechariah in the latter half, the portion you were talking about, Rick, beginning after chapter 9, where there's this stuff about the shepherds and the
Yep.
shepherds that are going to be judged. And there's this weird kind of symbolic moment where that shepherd has these two staves and the staves are broken. And then in chapter 11, verse 13, this is what the Lord says to Zechariah: "Throw this money into the treasury," and the money is 30 shekels of silver.
Oh, is
And-
that
Oh,
the
I've heard of
price
that
for,
before.
What is that price?
Judas?
Yes.
And that's the price in the Gospel of Matthew
That
that
Judas gets
Judas
paid.
is paid for Jesus betraying Jesus. Interestingly enough, and I didn't know this until this time around reading and going back and looking, this is actually not just first this specific price, 30 shekels. This is not the first time it is found in the Hebrew Bible.
Oh.
In fact, this is the price in Exodus 21:32 of reparation that has to be paid if you accidentally kill someone's slave, which is just, is there a connection? I'm not sure. I think it's fascinating. that this just so happens to be the price for a slave. It's just another wrinkle in maybe Matthew's use of this.
Yeah.
Matthew really likes the book of Zechariah.
I mean, we talked about this in our Matthew episode a long time ago, but Matthew is the most quote unquote Jewish of the four gospel authors. And he's writing to and in a Jewish Christian context. So he's not writing for Gentile Christians.
Right.
And so part of his message is this Jesus thing is new, but it's been spoken of before. And Jesus' story is grafted into the story of Moses and the stories of the Old Testament. And so over and over again, he keeps finding ways to magnify that.
Yep.
I could probably figure out some way to make something of that it was the price for the reparations for accidentally killing somebody else's slave or something. There's some way of tying that.
Someone surely has written a PhD thesis on that.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
That's interesting when you think about Paul in Philippians saying Jesus took on the form of a slave, of a doulos. A lot of times it gets translated servant. You know, this idea of Jesus as a lowly person, as a lower class citizen, being handed over to death for 30 shekels, almost like a sense of this slave being handed over to death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting connections.
Yeah, that slave, we'll probably talk about this sometime when we talk through the New Testament, but slave language is throughout the New Testament.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're right, particularly in American English translations,
Right.
that gets cleaned up because of our nation's history with slavery. So our translators tend to swap in things like servant or helper, but the word is slave.
Yeah, I'm thinking about when he's washing everybody's feet and they're insisting on not doing that and about having to be the slave to all. Here I am and I'm bowing down and I'm doing this for you all. And the intention is that if you're following after me, you're going to be serving all in this way. And that's probably, and I haven't looked it up and we can look it up later, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of those moments where the language used, that the original language is a slave to all, not a servant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, you could definitely make something out of that. Anything else about Zechariah here?
I did just want to say, I'm trying to look up John when Jesus rides into Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, remember, this is not when Jesus is riding into Jerusalem for his crucifixion.
No,
because John doesn't have that.
It's the very beginning.
John 12. And it's just a donkey. It's not a donkey and
a colt
like Matthew has it. Isn't that funny?
Well, they were using a different translation by the time John.
John's like, Matthew.
Yeah, he's like, come on.
Me.
You really messed this one up.
Kidding me.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of the sheep and the shepherds and the being angry with the bad shepherds, which we had a lot of in one of the earlier prophets, and now I've forgotten which one, kept going on and on about the shepherds. That becomes all of the good shepherd stuff that we then apply to Jesus. So it's just kind of interesting that there's some of that shepherd imagery and stuff in here again.
Mm-hmm. So Malachi.
Let's go Malachi.
Finish off here.
Yeah.
Finish the Old Testament.
Oh, man. I feel like we are like crossing a threshold here.
Crossing a threshold. Entering the intertestamental period.
Our girds.
It's definitely.
Our
what
loins have been
connections
girded.
shall we make as we make this crossing?
So
The look on Rick's face just then. See, this is why we call it cross connections.
Mom humor.
one quick interesting point about Malachi.
Yeah.
Like Habakkuk, the name Malachi is never used anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. And I'm sure your translation mentions this, Rick. But the book actually in the Septuagint doesn't even say the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. The Septuagint translates it as the word of the Lord to Israel by my messenger, because Malachi just means messenger.
Messenger.
And so, interestingly enough, there's a question of, does this book even have a prophet's name? Like, obviously, we call it Malachi. We think of the person as being a person named Malachi, but that's kind of open to question of, is this a proper name or is it just a title for someone, my messenger? And the Septuagint treated it as just a title to a person.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Don't get a lot of information about in the front end of the book when this book was written. But like we said, written post-exilic period.
So at this point, the temple has been rebuilt. We've had some prophets who are railing against the people for not building the temple, but tending to their own homes. But finally now the temple is rebuilt, but Malachi is now hammering the people because they are failing to live spiritual lives. He's particularly hard on the priests. And in fact, the language he uses at the beginning of chapter 2 is quite amazing. I'll just read a few verses. So now to you priests, this order. if you don't listen and don't receive it into your mind to give honor to my name, Yahweh of armies has said, the Lord of hosts, I shall send off a curse among you. I shall curse your blessings. Indeed, I have cursed it because you don't receive it into your mind. Here I am. I'm going to reprimand your seed. I'm going to spread feces on your faces, the feces from your festival sacrifice. So he's not very impressed with the priests.
Yeah, he says a little bit later in 7, for the lips of a priest should guard knowledge, and people should seek instruction from his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. But you have turned aside from the way.
Yeah.
You have caused many to stumble by your instruction. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says the Lord of hosts. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not all feces.
Yeah.
In the middle of chapter 3, God says, and this is verse 7, come back to me and I'll come back to you. So little carrot, little stick. And then we have the day coming in chapter 4.
The day of our Lord?
It's coming.
The day of the Lord?
It's burning like an oven.
Oh, yeah. That doesn't sound very nice either, just like the other ones.
Yeah.
Days of the Lord don't sound so nice. But we're going to tread on the wicked. That'd be good.
I did just want to say one thing about the verse you just referenced, Rick. Come back to me and I will come back to you. I think this is the verse people that say God helps those who help themselves.
Is it really?
I think this is, no, I mean, not
What?
really. I'm joking a little bit. But I think not a scriptural verse, but I think this is maybe the verse they have in mind, even unconsciously, when they say that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because there is a little bit of that right there in Malachi, when Malachi's saying that. And it's just interesting. Again, within this covenantal theology, there is different stresses placed. Some place the stress on Yahweh, on God, as God will be the one that will, across these, one of the things we didn't talk about is across these books, there's a lot of language of the remnant, and there's a lot of language as God is the one who is ultimately responsible for saving this remnant. But yeah, that verse in Malachi, it rubs me the wrong way.
Really?
Oh yeah, come back to me and I'll come back to you. Because again, think about the conversation we just had with Habakkuk about the way Paul interprets Habakkuk as actually this isn't predominantly about you, it's about God.
Yeah.
And you participate in God's action. And I think that's let me be clear, like people that read Paul as like an anti-Jewish thinker, like this is a very Jewish idea.
Yeah.
It's rooted in kind of covenantal language. But Malachi, I don't like the way he frames it as come back to me and I will come back to you.
Yeah. I like that, honestly. I mean, I like the two sides. Like my side in the relationship with God matters too.
I think we've talked about this before about the free will. God's not forcing us back.
Yeah.
God's trying to encourage us back. God wants that relationship. It desires that relationship and is open to that relationship and has it out there, but also is allowing that sometimes there's lots of punishments for going away. And sometimes God gets all cranky, spurned husband about it, but that God kind of still does allow to some degree for us to have that side, to be the ones to return as well. But yeah, I can see how sometimes things can be lovely if you look at them one way and really ugly when you turn it around and look at it a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really depending on the way you look at it. I could totally see how it's either or. I will say, speaking of verses I do in Malachi, I love the verse, speaking of metaphors for God, in chapter 2, verse 10. My point with bringing that up about Rick's last comment with return to me and I will return to you is different authors in the Old Testament, different authors in the entire Bible, New Testament and Old Testament, they prioritize different imagery, different metaphors, and that kind of has an outworking theologically of how they understand our relationship to God. And Malachi, interestingly enough, uses throughout the entire book a lot of familial language. That really seems to be his guiding metaphor. And so in chapter 2, verse 10, Malachi says, have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another? Yeah. That's such, that's such
we're all brothers and sisters.
That's such a good line. It's such a good reminder of when you have this metaphor of we share in God like a family and God is the Father of us all, to use that metaphor. And of course, every metaphor breaks down and has its problems, etc. But the outworking of this metaphor is faithfulness to one another.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful image. So I like that one. It comes up again in the middle of the book and then towards the end of the book as well. There's an interesting metaphor about children. And in Malachi, the end of chapter 3, verse 17, speaking to returning, what you were talking about, Rick.
Yeah.
This to me seems to be much more proactive on God's part. God says, "They shall be mine, says the Lord of hosts, my special possession on the day when I act." Isn't that interesting?
There we go. Okay.
And I will spare them as parents spare their children who serve them.
Yeah.
So just interesting to see the way these metaphors work out. It's really great there to even see it in very clear language as parents, It's
Yeah.
very much.
How about in chapter 4? What do you think's going on here in verse 2? But there will rise for you who are in awe of my name, a faithful son with healing in its rays.
Yeah, definitely. For Christians, a Messianic kind of understanding.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, this is the reason why Malachi is the last book of,
Right.
of
But
the
it's-
Hebrew Bible
but
in
it's-
Christian Bibles. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, sorry, and I totally talked over what you were trying to say
No,
there.
it's fine.
So probably you should repeat it for the sake of our recording.
No, keep it natural, baby.
Yeah, it's all
Keep it
good.
natural.
All right. The sun here is sun, S-U-N,
Yes,
as in the
right.
celestial
Listeners,
orb.
yeah,
Oh,
listeners might
thank
not
you.
have picked that up.
But
Yes.
I do believe we use the term son, S-O-N, as in male child of righteousness
Yeah.
when we talk about Jesus.
Yep.
So here it's sun, celestial orb of righteousness, and there it is son, male child of righteousness.
Yes.
Very interesting too.
But even from the Jewish conception, I think you're looking forward to a time when things will be made right, that there is a time of hope and a time of healing, and someday we'll get there.
There is I wish I could find it. There is some folk hymn it's written from this verse. But for you who know my name, the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in its wings. And I wish I could find it.
There was another, I needed to have written it down. There was another phrase in here that I'm like, we wrote a whole song out of that one little bit of verse.
I found it. There is a folk band named the Welcome Wagon. What a name. They have a song, maybe Natalie can splice it in, but for you who fear my name. And it's based on this verse. It's a fun tune.
Huh.
I don't know if there's like a hymnody about it, but yeah, the Welcome Wagon, you can go look it up.
I just noticed that my weird translation translates it faithful son with healing in its rays, but most translations have healing in its
Wings.
in his wings.
Yep.
Yes.
Which isn't that O Come All Ye Faithful? Don't we use that?
Yes.
Healing in his wings. Bum, bum, bum,
Oh.
bum, 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 bum.
Yes, that's
So
right.
what a catch.
Drawn
Wow.
right from Malachi.
Yeah, I was like, when you said that, I'm like, healing in his wings. I'm like, that's
Yeah,
right.
I
It's
knew
in there
that.
somewhere.
It's Hark the Herald.
Hark the Herald.
Angels. Where'd you find that?
I think I found this band, the Welcome Wagon, at some point, somehow. And out of all of the verses you're grabbing to write, Malachi 4:2.
Yeah.
I honestly, that's kind of how I felt.
I have it tattooed on my back.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I think the other thing, Rick, you mentioned with Malachi ending the Old Testament in Christian Bibles, it is not the end of the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
Again, remember the Christian canon is set up kind of for theological purposes. And Malachi 4 ends talking about Moses and Elijah. And Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 says, "Lo, I will send you," so, future tense, "I
Yeah.
will send you the prophet Elijah." And interestingly enough, the gospel writers,
The Transfiguration, it's
Yep.
Moses and Elijah who show up on either side of Jesus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Moses
So,
speaking, all the prophets. and
I think
the
as
law.
well, too, the other thing the gospel writers do, now that I'm thinking about it, is when they write about John the Baptist, they write about him in a way that is pulling from the descriptions of Elijah.
Oh, yeah.
This idea of eating locusts and honey,
Yes.
wearing a leather belt,
He's also known as the messenger.
the messenger. Yep.
Yeah.
So again, that's almost their way of being like John the Baptist is the Elijah that God has
Yep.
sent. I don't know if we have more to say about Malachi, but I was wondering if we might want to say something about the intertestamental period.
It's different than this Apocrypha stuff.
No,
No.
it's not in a sense. It's actually
Ah.
very related. I mean, I did not prepare these comments a lot. It was just something I was reflecting on. And it's just a way of saying that with the prophets, a lot of this is written around the Babylonian exile. And here we're ending right around the post-exilic period. So this would have been written around early 500s, late 400s. And then we talked about Daniel, which is written probably the oldest book of the Old Testament. When I say the oldest, I mean the newest.
The newest.
Wait,
That's
so the most
that's such a horrible way that
last,
time.
Last thing that was written.
Right.
The most, the closest to zero.
Yes, the closest to zero.
But so all of this we're talking about some of these in the Second Temple period.
Yes.
Early Second Temple period.
Yeah, so important to even remind listeners of what that is, because we haven't even actually we haven't used that language a lot.
No.
But this is a language that gets used a lot in New Testament scholarship, because this is the period from the rededication of the Second Temple in 515 to the destruction of that temple in 70 AD by the Roman Empire. So a little different than the word intertestamental period, but definitely bound up with it. And what is really interesting about this period is that prophetic literature basically disappears. Apocalyptic literature kind of rises. And it's really interesting because in this period, I was just reading an excerpt, I think, from Second Baruch, which is one of these kind of apocryphal books.
As one does.
As one does, preparing for the podcast.
Baruch is
And
fun.
there's this really interesting line where it says, in the days of old, our ancestors had the prophets. And in our day, we have the Torah. And it's just really interesting because historically, in this period, there is somewhat a disappearance of prophets as an office and then prophetic writing. And it becomes much more focused on these questions of kind of written authority. You kind of begin the development of trying to develop a Jewish canon.
This is so important. And it's so important as we come into the New Testament. What happens while we're in Babylon, we don't have a temple. We have to do something.
Yeah.
Like people, they felt like if we don't do something with our faith, then our children won't have faith and our faith will die. And so we can't have a temple cult. We can't have sacrifices. But what we can do is we can write, edit, and read scripture. And so one of the things that comes out of Babylon and then we carry with us into the intertestamental period is this idea of synagogues.
Right.
Prior to Babylon, there are no synagogues. There is just a temple in Jerusalem and maybe a temple or two in the north. But once we come back, we rebuild the temple, and that's great, and we build on it and again make it bigger and better. But what we also start doing is building what we would call little churches, little synagogues, little buildings, all throughout ancient Israel. And there's no sacrificing going on there. They're not taking sheep and goats and pigeons and all that. They are coming together and they are reading scripture, and the rabbis getting up, and not a priest, because we don't need priests. We need priests in the temple. Rabbi, who's a teacher, gets up and teaches on the scriptures. And when Christianity arises, it's in the synagogues. I mean, we see Jesus in the synagogues over and over again. And then we see Paul basically set up Christian synagogues, little Christian assemblies all over the place
the church in Corinth and the
church in Ephesus and Galatia.
I just want to say, Rick, that's such a good point, because I was literally flipping to Luke 4 when what does Jesus do? He goes to the synagogue. And it's so funny because if you think about this, when you close Malachi and let's say you open the Gospel of Luke, naturally you should, if you're paying really close attention, be like, what the heck
What's
is a
synagogue? I haven't heard this before.
This word has never come up in the Old Testament. So that's helpful history.
But it arises in the intertestamental period. I mean, that's what...
So it's a place for people to come together, to gather around these scriptures that have been written up during the exilic period. They're still traveling to the temple periodically.
Yeah, for the big festivals.
The big festivals and whatnot. I mean, that's in the New Testament, Jesus going to the temple in Jerusalem.
There's still that going on.
As an
but
adult.
They also have this, in each town, in each city, there's a synagogue.
Yeah.
And this is nerdy, and the time is getting nigh. But Christian worship, like our worship on Sunday mornings, the first half of what we do from the moment we come in up and through the peace before we start communion, we call it the liturgy of the word. Its technical word is the synaxis. It was the Christian version of what was done in the synagogue. So we come together, we read the scriptures, we talk about them, we pray, and then we get ready to break bread.
the liturgy of the table.
So, yeah.
So our liturgy is the two pieces
Right.
of Sunday morning, the liturgy of the word and then the liturgy of the table.
Yeah. And what we see
which
is
would not have been happening in the synagogues.
no. So the first Christians keep going to the synagogues.
Yep.
Because they're not like, oh, Jesus founded another religion. No, Jesus is our religion. He's Jewish.
Right.
So they keep going into the synagogues, but then they keep talking about Jesus. And then on Sunday mornings, they come together and just the Christians get together and they break bread and share wine. Eventually when...
And at that point, and I know you would say this a million times over, Rick, they're not even the Christians.
No, they're just...
To your point, they are Jews who follow Jesus.
Christ,
So they
Jesus.
go to the synagogue and then they gather together in their homes. They're followers of the way.
And then eventually they become this other thing.
Right.
And I think it's a mutual decision. I think the people in the synagogue are like, you guys are not really with us anymore. And they're probably like, yeah, we're not with you anymore.
It was time for a rebrand.
And so what they did was they took what they were doing in the synagogue and they took what they did on Sunday morning with sharing bread and wine and they smushed it together into one thing.
Right.
And that's church on Sunday morning.
Yep.
And that's why we do what we do.
Yep.
And that's why we do what we do. You heard it here first.
Boom.
Thank you all for joining us for all of the Old Testament, for the Hebrew Scriptures. This has been quite a journey.
Didn't we say we were going to have cake?
We did say that, but you know
There's
what?
cake upstairs.
It's right after. Oh, that's true. There is cake upstairs.
There's cake upstairs.
Maybe we'll have cake next week again when we get into the New Testament.
Into Acts.
I can't
Or maybe
believe
we'll
I
have cake in December when we
can't-
finish out the season.
I can't believe I have to read the whole book of Acts for next week's episode. That's a long book. It's
a
big book.
long book.
I hadn't even looked yet.
It's a long book.
It's a long one.
All right, well.
Gird your loins.
Yeah.
Gird your loins.
It might be worth telling our listeners, one, that we hope they join us in reading the New Testament. I know many have been listening for the Old Testament, kind of got lost with the pace of the reading. With the New Testament, we're going to be doing something a little different where we're not just recording an episode book by book. It's going to be more like these minor prophet episodes where there are lots of books on each episode, right?
Yeah, we have a few episodes that will be discrete books,
Right.
like our first several will be. So Acts 1 and Acts 2. And there's a lot there.
There's just one Acts episode.
Is there just one Acts?
Yeah,
There's
we
one
switched
Acts
it.
episode. Yeah.
Because then there's a Romans episode.
Fix my thinking. So sorry.
The mice have been playing behind Natalie.
There's a lot to Acts. So initially there were two, and
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that we had changed that. Yes. So one big old Acts
That's
episode.
why I was saying with trepidation, I have to read this whole book for next week.
Yes. And so then one on Romans exclusively. We have a special guest coming we're very excited about. And then I'm going to have to get back to you because I don't have the rest of the list. Wait, I could pull it up. But the point being.
I've had so many people meet me in the narthex and be like, love the podcast, listening through. It's excellent. And I just fell off the wagon reading. And so this is where I say you declare Cross Connections bankruptcy.
Yep.
And you just go right to the New Testament. And between now and basically Christmas, you can read the New Testament.
Yep.
And so come join us.
Yeah, come and join us. And we'll share again our links to the gospel episodes that we've already recorded. We were overly ambitious when we said we were going to go through those 4 times each. That
oh my
was,
goodness, that was.
I don't know what we were thinking.
We were younger and more naive way back then, 50
we were
episodes
so
ago.
excited about this 50 episodes ago. And not that we're not still so excited about this. It's just that reality has caught up with us. Yep. Yes, Acts, Romans, Galatians. Then we'll get to the Pauline epistles, the pastoral epistles, the other stuff, and John.
The other stuff. Looking forward to it.
The other stuff.
And that'll take us right up to the middle of December when you'll get a little break to have Christmas. All right. So, folks, don't forget to share out these episodes. We're still running our tote bag offer. If you share the podcast on your social media, don't forget to tag us so that we see it. And we'll enter you into a tote bag. Maybe we'll put some extra special gifts inside the tote bag to sweeten the deal.
Sounds fun. I might have to share it again.
There you go. Then you might win it.
Am I allowed to win it? I don't think I'm allowed
I don't
to
think
win
so.
it. Okay.
No, there's some
Hey,
fine
a raffle's a raffle.
some fine print in there about the people and the families of the people running it don't get to win. So that's what we got for you this week. Join us again next week in the New Testament. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cross Connections Cover to Cover. New episodes drop each Wednesday. Please be sure to follow or like us on your favorite podcasting app to find us easily each week, or join us on our email list at stdavidschurch.org/crossconnections. If you have questions for us, you can call us at 484-588-5656 and leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and your question or comment. Please note, we may use your recorded voice in an upcoming episode of Cross Connections. If you like what you hear, we'd love if you would share this with your friends and rate us in Spotify and Apple Podcasts or whatever other app you're using so people can find us as well. Don't forget to visit our show notes for the year's reading list and any other resource links we've mentioned. Cross Connections is a ministry of St. David's Episcopal Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Season 2 Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley,
Elliot Van Hoy,
and Natalie Hill. Logo, graphic design, and podcast production by Natalie Hill. Stock media music provided by Marscott and Mood Mode Pond 5. You're welcome to learn more about all of St. David's worship and ministries at stdavidschurch.org. All righty.
Where am I?
Well,
when am I?
we're in the Cross Connections studio 1715, where we record Cross Connections.
I love when you slip right into radio voice. It's good.
Yeah, it's the radio voice.